NASA says that right presently is an eminent and significant chance to zero in the world Venus. This follows the new revelations of conceivable life in the world. If you somehow managed to glance through NASA's records from the 1960s, you'd see the space organization calling Venus a planet of judgment, while Mars turned into our essential goal. Such cautious naming of the fundamental planets was entirely expected during the extraordinary space race period. The Soviet Association was centered around sending aggressive missions to Venus, the captivating planet that showed little commitment forever. However, the Soviet space program didn't decommission the Venera program until the fall of the domain. As per Neil deGrasse Tyson, we at last grasp the reason why. As we analyze the declassified photographs from Venus taken by the Soviet Association, we see that the fall of the Soviet Association was huge in numerous ways. Besides the fact that it changed the worldwide scene, yet the shortfall of the domain additionally disguised numerous privileged insights. The Soviets had major areas of strength for mystery, dealing with the most astounding data office on Earth while being watchful about their genuine limit with regards to extraterrestrial contact. This recommends that the previous superpower holds many secret bits of insight. Before the US overwhelmed most planetary undertakings in space, the Soviet Association was driving the charge. While the realm has a long history of both effective and ineffective space missions, its most conspicuous spotlight was on the unfriendly planet Venus. In Russian, Venus is designated Venera, which is additionally the name of the mission that endured from 1961 to 1983. During similar period, the US was distracted with sending its missions to the moon. As it were, the Soviets chose to allot their assets somewhere else. We can't say that the fixation on the second planet from our sun is surprising. Did the Soviets expect to use the planet's surface as a practical and striking base for power, or would they say they were maybe intending to colonize it in the wake of looking for any indications of something going on under the surface? It's amazingly challenging to decide why the realm was so centered around the secretive planet. Since the Soviets sent off these investigation missions during the virus war, they were not totally straightforward about their targets and objectives. Truth be told, a lot of what we are familiar the Venusian missions depends on declassified and unarchived data. By the by, it is trying to pinpoint what the Soviets were genuinely looking for and whether they revealed the privileged insights of Venus. The Soviets didn't arrive on Venus only a single time or even 2 times, however, on various occasions. They send off 28 costly rockets to the charming planet, with 13 entering the Venusian air and 8 landing. These intricate missions situated the Soviets at the front of room investigation. While the US was a nearby second, NASA was more centered around satellites and creative innovation than on looking for life on different planets. Its emphasis on Mars came as an optional need. Your set of experiences reading material may not let you know this, but rather the Soviet space program was quick to send a test into the environment of a planet other than Earth. It likewise accomplished a few different firsts. The USSR turned into the principal country to accomplish a delicate arriving on another planet, returning pictures and sounds from the outer layer of a different universe. Believe it or not, the Soviets had their own one little step for man, one Goliath jump for humanity, second some time before the US. So for what reason do we seldom find out about such accomplishments? Review what we referenced about the Soviet inclination for mystery. That is only one of many purposes behind the disregard of the Soviet space program. Back in 1992, the unmistakable association was decommissioned following the disintegration of the USSR, and it must be changed under another Russian character, Roscosmos. A lot of its verifiable information was either lost or obliterated. For this reason, we miss the mark on conclusive response with respect to why the Soviets sent off 28 rockets into the Venusian climate. In any event, can make ballpark estimations. Maybe the Soviet choice to investigate Venus was more about cost-effectiveness than whatever else. It is not necessarily the case that the space program knew nothing about the planet's true capacity. They were looking for useful water presence, levels of daylight-based radiation, and the overall qualities of the planet. Without a progression of these space missions, it would have been undeniably challenging to survey Venus' high temperatures and thick air. Today, numerous stargazers don't really accept that the threatening planet could uphold life. The temperatures are sufficiently high to soften lead, and water is scant. Moreover, because of its thick air, the strain on Venus is normally multiple times that of Earth. Nonetheless, these are extremely late turns of events, and to ignore the USSR's commitment to the investigation of Venus is likened to updating history. All things considered, Venus merited investigating, regardless of whether basically to fuel the space race. Inspecting other more neighborly planets like Mars wasn't completely off the table, however it was more costly than sending tests to Venus. Eventually, everything boils down to the separation from Earth to another divine body. Overall, 250 million kilometers away. Such immense contrasts in distance bring about huge contrasts in cost. Moreover, in the event that the US hadn't been the world's biggest economy, it may very well never have been possible to investigate Mars. Different reports recommend that Soviet missions were hazardous and had critical specialized holes. Obviously, the space apparatus were not prepared to cover tremendous distances. Besides, the association had an unfortunate history of losing contact with its rockets, so it seems okay why the Soviet space program picked a more possible and closer mission that would yield results. Be that as it may, in the event that we don't consider the space race in this unique circumstance, the account of the Venera missions would be deficient. The US wasn't even on the space map when the Soviet program sent off the principal fake satellite, Sputnik 1, in 1957. This move strengthened the space race and kept up with its energy. What is genuinely fascinating is the explanation the US zeroed in on the Moon rather than Venus. NASA confronted a progression of difficulties with its Venus missions during the 1960s, bringing about a stalemate known as the Venus Reveal. Each time they sent off a test into the Venusian climate, it finished heartbreakingly. This was exactly whenever the Soviet Association saw an amazing chance to exploit NASA's disappointments. Around then, both the US and the still up in the air to arise triumphant in the space race. The best procedure was to exploit two particular open doors. It was a calm at this point, unequivocal methodology. The Soviet space program held onto Earth's sister planet as a vital accomplishment in the space race, achieving something that its significant rival had neglected to do. In spite of the realm's restricted assets and botched government, it more than once sent off missions to Venus to get its victorious situation against the US. Rather than NASA's emphasis on the Moon, this essential division was not without ill will. Moreover, publicity was utilized to cloud their huge disappointments with Venus. The American government was provoked to reprimand the USSR's fixation in the world and the media. Venus was named the horrendous planet, while Mars turned into man's predetermination. These assignments didn't discourage the Soviets. Their main goal was to show predominance over the Americans, and they succeeded. The Venera missions are almost failed to remember in present-day history, yet notwithstanding their initial starting points, those missions were exceptionally cutting-edge and aggressive. To be sure, toward the beginning of the space age, the Venera missions drove the way. Reflecting back to the 1950s, the Soviets started exploring different avenues regarding the plan and specialized subtleties of the tests. For the following 30 years, they proceeded to construct and send off interplanetary shuttle as a component of the Venera program. Since this program was running close by a very wild virus war, the Soviets zeroed in on expanding their assets. Luckily for them, the early long periods of the contention furnished them with additional assets than the US. This benefit ended up being massively important, permitting them to fabricate bigger rockets intended to get through high heights and critical distances. The Soviets rushed to try different things with both monitored and automated space apparatus, while the Soviet scholarly local area dealt with a progression of estimations and assessments to make exact directions for the Venus missions. In the background, their Mars programs were additionally working effectively. For the Soviet space program, nothing was a higher priority than creating refined instrumentation for these tests, prompting the best advances throughout the entire existence of room investigation. In 1966, the Soviet Association sent off Venera 3, making it the principal fake test to enter the climate of Venus and effectively influence the planet's surface. This accomplishment escalated the opposition between the two superpowers. Dissimilar to the American missions, which were tormented by disappointments and halts, the Soviet program kept on gaining ground. Regardless of progressing difficulties, the USSR figured out how to send effective tests into the Venusian climate. The central concern with this approach was restricted plan limit. The Soviets rapidly defeated their plan difficulties and sent off the most exceptional models of the Venera program during the 1970s. Their spearheading capacities permitted them to lead the first synchronous send-offs of Venera 4 and Venera 5. As per most antiquarians, this was the most thrilling 10 years throughout the entire existence of room investigation. For sure, the U.S. endeavored to foster comparable send-off methodologies.